Let's talk about Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky says that his meeting with Donald Trump and JD Vance in front of the whole media, well, that meeting was regrettable, and he says that he is ready to sign this minerals deal. Now, we know that Donald Trump has paused US military aid to Ukraine, and the latest development is that the US has paused intelligence sharing with Ukraine. So that possibly includes critical data for identifying Russian strike targets. Now, that's likely to have some quite serious consequences. How significant is this in terms of putting, real pressure on Ukraine to show more of a willingness to engage in talks with Putin and the US? What does it mean for the war?
Well, it is serious to halt the flow of weapons and to halt briefings on intelligence is incredibly serious. But to understand Trump, you've got to understand two things, which people have got to see this with great clarity. When you understand these two things, you understand what he's doing. First of all, his policy is America first, and he's explained that 1,000 times. The second thing you've got to remember is the American economy is completely unsustainable. The budget deficit, the budget position is unsustainable. When you understand those two things, most of what Trump does is explicable. So his view basically is, as we know, why should American troops and American taxpayer funds go to the Ukraine? That's Europe's job. Well, I think most people outside Europe agree with that, and he's been very successful in getting the Europeans to start thinking about increasing their defence expenditure. Look at the UK, for example. So it is very serious for the Ukraine. What we don't know is what's been said in those discussions with the Russians, privately with the Russians. We don't know what Russia are prepared to give up to do in order to resolve this endless war. So Trump's basically saying to the Europeans, you pay, no American troops on the ground. Ukraine has to reach some kind of compromise because he knows the Europeans are not really in a position to fund this war. At the end of the day, Trump knows without America, the Europeans can't fund the war. And in 3 years, it's a tit for tat. The Russians have taken more ground than they've lost. They've lost a small amount, but not much. The war's been going for over 3 years. It's unsustainable. The Europeans don't have the will or the capacity to fight it. So Trump says to himself, well, look, they can't win the war for the Ukraine. So it has to stop. I need Ukraine to compromise, and I need the Russians to compromise. And that's what he's doing. The Europeans, let's be frank, they can bleat all they want about JD Vance and Trump. The fact of the matter is the Europeans have been so weak over the last decade, 20 years maybe, since the war, if you want to take it back that far. And Trump's basically saying, we are not the world's policemen any longer to fund every single country, every single war. You take up the mantle. But even if you do take up the mantle, you cannot help Ukraine win the war, so there has to be peace. And that's where Trump's coming from.